I tried a Hardcore Nuzlocke of Pokémon Black 2, and that's it. Except I've never played these games before in my life, so I thought I'd make my first playthrough a Hardcore Nuzlocke. This means that any Pokemon that faints must be boxed forever, and I can only catch one Pokemon per route. The other Hardcore Nuzlocke rules are on the screen. I also can't look stuff up, which makes this challenge much more harder. Let's do this. We start out this challenge in Asperida City, a much different location from the first games. We do meet our rival and Bianca, a returning character from the first game. It should be noted that I do know a few things about Black 2 and White 2. I know Iris is the champion and where the legendaries are, as well as some gym leader teams. With that out of the way, it's time to pick up a starter. I decided to go with Tepig because he's the best one in Black, so I assume the same is true here. Plus, water types are always a dime a dozen, and grass types are, well, grass types. We'll address that later in a future video. Welcome to the Team Iron Man. Iron Man dispatches of the little otter, and all of a sudden we have to catch a first encounter being a Patrat. But I guess Iron Man really wants a solo journey because he crits the Patrat, meaning no annoying rodent for us. What we can do is watch Alder mercifully jump down a cliff, and on Route 20 we can get a stab at a second encounter. This encounter ends up being a Swaddle, which is a surprisingly bad encounter. On the next route, I encounter a Marrow who is a better Pokemon, and if he has huge power which raises his attack, he's a phenomenal Pokemon, but he doesn't. After defeating our rival site, I meet up with Team Plasma, and they have sick new uniforms. Way better than what they had before. All of this leads to our first gym fight against Charon. He's moved up in the world and is now a gym leader. Charon leads off with Patrat, and I with Gamora the Swaddle. A Bug Bite does massive damage as the rodent goes for a scary workup. Fortunately, on the following turn we outspeed and pick up the KO with a Bug Bite. Second is Lillipup, who goes for a Tackle, which only does a little bit of damage. Bug Bite does a little less than 50%, meaning that Lillipup will survive and heal up on the following turn. Lillipup outspeeds and hits a Tackle before Bug Bite hits, and actually gets a critical hit to take Lillipup out and ending the battle prematurely. That was a pretty sweet first gym badge victory. Making my way to Verbank Complex, I get my next encounter being a Pidove. I know you can get a Magnemite here, but a regional bird is always nice to have, even if he's the worst one out of all the regional birds. Unfortunately, tragedy strikes because a random trainer in Roxy's gym ends poor Gamora's life, marking our first death of the run. Fly high, although you don't have wings. After the battle, my starter Iron Man evolves into a Pignite, a pretty ugly Pokemon. Whose idea was it to make 3 firefighting starters 3 times in a row? Thank goodness I won't be using a firefighting starter in a future fire challenge. From here, it's off to face Roxy for badge number 2. Here she leads off with Coughing and I with Falcon. An Air Cutter gets a lucky crit for massive damage, and then an Assurance tickles me. Thanks to the Air Cutter crit, a follow-up attack picks up the KO, bringing in Whirlipede, who goes for a Protect for some reason. After taking a Venoshock for massive damage, an Air Cutter does a little less than 50%. I then hard switch into Iron Man on the Venoshock, which luckily doesn't poison. Iron Man then outspeeds and gets the KO, winning me the second gym badge, Deathless. After going after Team Plasma and their cool new uniforms, I backtrack to Verbank City, where I can go on a random boat with a random man, who is probably a criminal of some sorts, to Castelia City, which looks pretty much the same for the most part. There is a clown standing in the center for some reason though. Still, it is a pretty cool location and one of my favorite locations in all of Pokemon. It also showed what the DS was capable of back then, which is still pretty mind-blowing to this day. Outside the city in the desert, I encounter a Sandile, which is probably one of the best encounters I can get for this game. A Dark and Ground type seems like an amazing combination, and the ability Moxie, which raises its attack after each KO, makes him a pretty good sweeper. Sight and I then go to the sewers, where I encounter a rat like it's New York City. Seriously, there are more rats than people in that city. We also once again face off against Team Plasma, who still suck, and then we meet 2 new characters, Colress and Berg. Berg is a returning character from the first game and the 3rd gym leader, although I'm not sure what he's doing in a sewer. Colress is a scientist who is just kinda there. Not sure what his deal is. There is also a cave in the sewers where I can encounter a Rock'n'Rolla, and I run out of Pokeballs, so no sentient rock for me. I then make my way to Berg's gym, and I can't help but notice that this place got a revamp. Instead of getting covered in sticky honey, we now get sucked up weird hardened silk. Sure. This is a Diddy gym. I'm so sorry. I'm really so sorry. You did not need to hear that. While fighting the gym trainers, Falcon evolves into a Pidove, which is perfect for the upcoming fight, and the weird New York rat evolves into a bigger rat. I really hate rats. Did I mention I stepped on a rat when I was in 6th grade? Yeah, that was pretty traumatizing. Berg leads off with Swaddle and I with Iron Man. A Flame Charge is luckily enough for the one shot and I get a Speed Boot. Second is Dwebble and I get off a few arm thrusts before the little crustacean goes for a Rock Polish. After taking a smackdown which hits for pitiful damage, a flame charge drags Dwebble into the yellow. Thanks to the speed boost, another flame charge is enough for the KO. Third and last is Leavanny, who has paper thin defenses. This means a single quad super effective flame charge is more than enough for the KO. Sorry buddy, you're not an issue this time like you were in my previous run. After this is an encounter with Colress, who wants to fight me, and he is a steel mono team. He leads off with Magnemite and I with Iron Man. A critical hit flame charge brings the magnet into the red as I get paralyzed with a thunder wave. Oh you little shit. Colress then heals up, meaning I stay fully paralyzed. After tanking a spark, a set of arm thrusts pick up the KO. Second is Clank, who falls to a couple of flame charges, winning me the battle and giving me some new info on this guy in case I have to fight him again. I then make my way to Nimbasa City, which looks exactly the same as it does in black and white. Glad some things never changed. What did change is this new gimmick called Hidden Grottos. Basically there are rare items and Pokemon like Raydens, but worse because my encounter is a no-name Mienshao, I don't really know how to say it. Welcome to the team I guess. Me forgetting to nickname this little rodent isn't a problem because in the first battle I put him in, he immediately dies to a random Tranquil. This marks our second death of the challenge. My live Pokemon are terrified of my misplays right now. Fortunately, I can pick up a replacement on Route 16, being a Liepard who seems like an okay Pokemon, although we already have a Dark type. In Lostthorn Forest, I encounter a Cottony, and since this isn't a Romac, no Fairy type, so this thing is useless. Plus, I have no idea where the Sunstone is located because I'm doing this game blind. What was the point of adding a black screen in between these two gates? Why not do a black screen at the second gate? This makes no sense, and it also lags my game for some reason. After some trivial battles, Sandman evolves into a Krokorok and becomes bipedal. This evolution is super important because it's already time to tackle Elisa and her electric types for the 4th gym badge. She leads off with Emolgia and I with Loki the Liepard. I go for a fake out for a bit of chip and then set up a Hone Claws before tanking a nasty Volt Switch which brings in Flaffy. A set of Fierce Stripes then do more than 50% as Flaffy goes for a Thunder Wave which doesn't work thanks to Limber. Another set of Fierce Stripes is just shy of the KO as Volt Switch brings me down to just 1 HP and causes Emolgia to come back out. I decide to switch to Hulk the Cottony on his debut battle on a Quick Attack. After tanking a second Quick Attack, I whiff a Poison Powder. And then Emolgia hits a Weak Pursuit and I finally connect with my Poison Powder, poisoning the Flying Rat. Pursuit then brings me down to just 17 HP and I go for a Charm, lowering Emolgia's attack, allowing me to switch on Sandman. Fortunately, Emolgia just goes for Volt Switch, which we're obviously immune to. After a final Quick Attack, a Crunch picks up the KO and gets me a Moxie boost, but then Static activates, paralyzing me as Flaffy takes the field once more. Elisa heals up, but a Moxie Crunch does massive damage and I avoid a takedown, but I get fully paralyzed, which sucks. Luckily, I then tank a takedown on the following turn and pick up the KO, which brings me to +2 attack as I stare down the Zebstrika. A Pursuit hits for a smidge, but then a +2 stab boosted Crunch gets the clean one-shot, winning me the battle and the 4th gym badge, although we did have a few close calls. After some Team Plasma plot which feels like filler, I have my first triple battle ever. It was here where I realized I've never had a triple battle in my life, and it's something that I wish Pokemon would bring back. They do seem like a lot of fun. Sorry Pokemon, if you're watching this, Legend ZA needs to have triple battles. Honestly, at this point, I just take news about Legend ZA. We asked you to go slow, and all of a sudden, you've just completely ghosted us. I then make my way to Charizard Bridge in a region with no Charizards, and I can encounter a little duck named Thanos. This little duck may not seem intimidating, but once he evolves, Thanos will be a great physical wall with Feather Dance and Roost stall out. Plus Step Fly and Surf aren't bad either. Swanna is a Pokemon that I would have never used at all if it weren't for Nuzlocke, so thank you Nuzlocks. And thank you. If you enjoy this, please consider subscribing to help me and the channel grow. It's completely free and it really makes my day. And also, please comment what Pokemon you would have never used if it weren't for Nuzlocks. This may or may not be for a future video. After going to Drifthill City, I meet up Rude, and I'm not sure to say his name. Either way, he fills me in the time gap between the first and the second game. He also gives me a reward being a gift Zora. And he has the imposter ability, meaning that any Pokemon in the back of my party is the Pokemon that Zora will copy. Obviously, it won't copy moves and stats, but I can trick the AI and it's a pretty good pivot. Welcome to the Team Zora, who I can't nickname because N owned it previously. In Chargestone Cave, I pick up a Joltik, who I'm sure will have a later use down the line. I can then face Clay for the 5th gym badge, and my team is not ready to face ground types. He leads off with an intimidating Krokorok, and I with Cap, who's now evolved into an Azumarill. A Crunch does decent damage as Bubble Beam is just shy of the KO. Clay then heals up, so I set up an Aqua Ring for passive recovery. Croak then goes for a Torment, allowing me to get the KO with another Bubble Beam. Second is Sandslash, who goes for a Rollout, and thanks to Torment, I have to switch between Bubble Beam and Charm. Luckily, a few turns later, a Bubble Beam destroys the little sand creature. Third is Excadrill, who is a terrifying ace. I mean, look at this thing. Not something you'd want to mess with. Excadrill goes for a Slash, and I go for a Charm, making this a little less scary. A Metal Claw then does a smidge before Bubble Beam smashes him to half, but a Berry heals him up. Fortunately, thanks to Charm and Aqua Ring, he doesn't do much damage, meaning around 4 turns later, Bubble Beam closes the fight and I win the 5th gym badge with just one Pokemon. After the battle is the Pokemon World Tournament, which is a gauntlet where I have to fight Sight, Charen, and Colress, so not really a World Tournament. My 3-man squad ends up being Iron Man, Cap, and Zoroark, because I've never used a Zoroark before. It would be cool if they brought in some past characters, but this still seems pretty fun. My first fight is against Sight. He leads off with Duat and I with Iron Man. I switch to Cap, who picks up the KO and a few slams. Second is Simisage, so it's off to Iron Man. He takes a Seed Bomb and destroys the Grass Monkey with a single Flame Charge. Last is Tranquil, so it's off to Cap disguised as Zoroark. After tanking an Air Cutter, Zoroark reveals himself thanks to Disguise breaking. Fortunately, Tranquil can't really touch us, so a few Night Slashes gets the KO, winning me the battle. Second in this gauntlet is Charen. He leads off with Stoutland and I with Iron Man. Stoutland goes for a workup to raise his attack stats as I hit an Arm Thrust, which luckily gets the 5 hits and are enough for the KO. Second is Chinchou, who like his brethren goes for a workup as Arm Thrusts are just shy of the KO. The little rodent hits a somewhat hard wake up slap before a set of Arm Thrusts destroy the koala. Go back to sleeping. Last is Watchog, who we outspeed and KO with a few Arm Thrusts, winning me the battle. Last in the series is a fight against Colress. He leads off with Magneton and I with Iron Man. A Flame Charge is just shy of the KO as I get paralyzed by Thunder Wave. I then get Thundershock for a bit of damage but stay fully paralyzed. Magneton then connects with a Supersonic, but against all odds Iron Man pulls through to melt the magnet. Second is Agelum, who I assume is a Psychic move, so I switch into Zoroark on a Growl. It's not like it matters because a Night Slash gets the one shot. Last from Colress is a Clink, and I forgot Dark resists Steel. I do some chip with Night Slash before I tank a Gear Grind. Realizing Cap is a better answer, it's off to him on a weak Gear Grind. A Bubble Beam is enough for the KO on the following turn, winning me the tournament. I have to say that was nice, but kind of a random gauntlet. I don't understand why cool trainers are reserved for the postgame. Making my way to the Team Plasma ship, tragedy strikes in this gauntlet as Cap dies to poison. I wasn't really paying attention, so sorry pal. And then tragedy strikes once again, as in Chargestone Cave, Falcon goes down to a random Ampharos. But that's okay, he wasn't too useful. Still, 2 deaths mean we're tied for badges and deaths. Further in Chargestone Cave, I hear the voice of a character. He sounds familiar, and I wonder if he's Ed. What a cool surprise. From here, I make it to Mistron City, where I meet Professor Juniper, who gives me a Master Ball, which is pretty early. On Route 7, I pick up a Zangoose, who is a somewhat cool encounter, and a Pokemon that I've never really used before. I also meet Marshall, who tells me the cave is closed. Screw you, buddy. Thor the Joltik also evolves into a Galvantula, whose electric type makes him very useful. Cap's replacement ends up being Thanos, the Pokemon I mentioned earlier. He evolves into a Swanna, and once again he's an amazing physical wall. From here, it's off to face Skylar for the 6th gym badge, and I'm assuming her team is similar to the one in Black and White 1. She leads off with Swoobat and I with Sandman, so I guess I was somewhat correct. After taking a surprisingly hard acrobatics, a Crunch destroys the Heartbird. Second is Swanna, and I'm not sure if I outspeed, so I switch into Thor on his debut battle on a hard Air Slash. Fortunately, we can outspeed and get the KO with a 4-time super effective Electro Web. Last is Scrummy, who takes an Electro Web on half and goes for an Agility. Fortunately, a Steel Wing scratches my Electric Bug before a final Electro Web gets the KO, winning me the 6th gym badge. After winning the battle, Skyla flies the Professor, Bianca, and I to Latimus Town so we can continue our quest. After enjoying the town sights, I have a rival fight with Sight. He leads off with Unfezant and I with Sandman. Unfezant pulls one out of the Pelipper handbook and attacks into my Crunch. After a taunt, a Crunch does minimal damage. Unfezant then goes for a Will Rend as Crunch brings him down into the yellow. A critical hit Razor Wind brings me down to just 2 HP before Crunch gets the KO. That was scary. Next is Simisage, so I switch to Iron Man, who is now Ambor and very ugly on a weak set of Fierce Waves. Of course, being a fire type, we wall him and take him out with a few flame charges after some healing shenanigans. Next is Samurott, who would obviously KO, so I switch into Thanos on a limp Aqua Jet. I then go for a Feather Dance, meaning Slash only does a bit of damage. I then go for another Feather Dance, as Revenge does a Sliver. A Fly on the following turn KOs and wins me the battle. Immediately following this fight, Sandman evolves into a red crocodile, which is an amazing encounter. For this playthrough, I decided I was going to look up movesets because they're not exclusive to Black and White 2, and man, Stab, Crunch, and Earthquake will be great. On Route 13, I encountered the legendary Pokemon Cobalion. I had no clue how I was going to catch it, but then I remembered I had the Master Ball, so I used that. For this playthrough, I am allowing legendaries because it makes things a little bit easier, and it's my first playthrough of what is basically a brand new game. I really want to feel like I'm 11 and in 4th grade again, and overpowered legendaries are really the only way to do so. I then make my way to a new town where I meet Professor Juniper, who is basically useless at this point. I then continue the story to the next point, and I encounter this gentleman who is completely optional. This completely son of a I mean Trainer leads off with Duran and I with Iron Man, who gets the KO with a few flame charges. This brings in Lucario. A flame charge does massive damage, but then Bone Rush takes us out. I had no clue that Lucario had that, and I must say I am pissed, even though Emboar is a pretty awful starter. If I'm losing any Pokemon, I'm glad it was Emboar, although it does suck losing my only fire type. I did catch a Litwick in the tower, but with no Duskstone, he is basically useless. On Route 9, I encounter a Gothitelle, a Pokemon that I've never used before, but a Psychic Spammer is always nice. I name her Widow, and she evolves into a powerful Gothitelle a few levels later. This brings me to the fight against Drayden and his Dragon types for the next gym badge. He leads off with Druddigon and I with Fury. A critical at Sacred Sword does massive damage and is just shy of the KO, as Revenge does a little less than half. After a potion, Sacred Sword looks like a 3-shot. I then go for an Iron Head, hoping for the flinch, which I do get, but he barely survives. Fortunately, Drayden doesn't heal, so another one picks up the KO. I also learned Swords Dance, which is an amazing move, although 11-year-old me would have not have used damaging moves. Second is Flygon, who is a no-go, so I switch into Thanos on a whiffed Earth Power. I then luckily avoid a Rock Slide, which I didn't know this thing had, before a Feather Dance brings Flygon to -2 attack. This means I can stay in, and Rock Slide doesn't even do half as I go for another Feather Dance. After taking a Rock Slide, a third Feather Dance brings Flygon to -6 attack. From here, it's off to Sandman as Flygon goes for a Dragon Tail, bringing in Widow. After taking a hard Earth Power, Psychic looks like a 2-shot. This means all I have to do is dodge a non-critical at Earth Power and Psychic melts the Dragon's mind. Last is Haxorus, so it's off to Thor on a hard Assurance. I then go for a Bug Bite to eat a Citrus Berry and get passive recovery as Haxorus goes for a scary Dragon Dance. A Slash doesn't crit and Dragon Tail instantly kills our big bug. RIP, thank you for your service. Fury comes in, and since Haxorus doesn't see the KO, he sets up another Dragon Dance and Sacred Sword is just shy of the KO. Drayden then gets greedy and goes for another Dragon Dance as Sacred Sword luckily picks up the KO. Those last 2 moves were pretty lucky, but it did cost us. RIP Thor, although I'm this surprised it took this long for a gym leader to KO one of my Pokemon. After the battle, I head to Drayden's house, but Team Plasma comes into town with a giant ship. From what I understand, Team Plasma decides to lay wreckage to the city and freeze it for some reason. Not sure what's going on, but sure. Either way, I'm out of here, and it's Drayden's problem now. The underwater tunnel in this game reminds me so much of the Sky Bridge. It's really so cool to see what the DS can do, although I put more Pokemon than, Basculin and Alomola, everybody's favorite water types. In Halamu City, I have my final fight against Marlin and his water types. He leads off with Caracosta and I with Wolverine. A Faint attack does massive damage before a Scald does massive damage and breaks our disguise. From here, it's off to Thanos to eat the Scald, but he gets burned, which sucks. I then go for a Feather Dance, allowing me to survive a Smackdown, but burn damage means I can't stay in. So it's off to Fury on a Smackdown for a whopping 3 HP. I then go for a Swords Dance, as Scald luckily doesn't burn. On the following turn, Sacred Sword destroys the bulky turtle, which brings in Wailord. Sacred Sword is just shy of the KO, and Scald brings me down deep into the red, but luckily I don't get burned. Marlin heals, and since I know I outspeed, 2 consecutive Sacred Swords gets the KO, leaving Jellicent. I decide to switch into Wolverine on a really hard brine. I can't switch, so I decide to stay in and fire off one last X Scissor, which crits for good measure before Brian destroys Wolverine. RIP buddy. You weren't here long, but you will be missed. Widow comes in, but Jellicent has Ominous Wind doing more than half before Psychic brings Jellicent down to his berry. Luckily, I then pivot to Sandman on what I expected to be an Ominous Wind, but it went for Brian, almost taking me out. Luckily, crunch is enough for the KO when you meet the 8th and final gym badge, though not without a cost. RIP Wolverine. On Route 22, I encounter Terrakion, but Culver stops me and gives me the Colress MCNH, which I never end up using. Either way, the real prize here is the Terrakion, who I catch after a while and name Green Goblin, but has an attack-lowering nature, which sucks. Either way, Legendary is still a Legendary, so I add him to the team. In the Giant Chasm, I pick up a Piloswine. Mamoswine is an amazing Pokemon with Earthquake and is a pretty hard hitter, so I replace Widow for now. After meeting up with the Move Reminder in Driftville City and having Spider-Man learn Ancient Power, I evolve him into a Mamoswine, a Pokemon that I'm pretty unfamiliar with. I then meet Marlin on the Team Rocket ship, leading to a pretty easy gauntlet. As per regular Pokemon games, the evil teams are not a threat. On the ship, I find out about the legendary ice Pokemon Kyurem and have my third battle against Colress, who turns out to be a bad guy. He leads off with Magneton and I with Sandman. I go for a crunch to break Sturdy as Flash Cannon does massive damage despite being resisted. Fortunately, a dig on the next turn is enough for the KO. Next is Magneton, who may have a super effective move, so I decide to switch into Green Goblin, but they go for an explosion. I thought it had a Psychic or Grass move or something, but I really dodged a bullet there. Second is Metang, who hangs on for a critical at Sacred Sword and goes for an Agility. Colress then heals up, so I get off a Swords Dance, raising my attack. Even with a boost, Metang isn't faster, but he hangs on from a Sacred Sword and goes for another Agility. A Meteor Mash then breaks it down to just 11 HP before Sacred Sword seals the deal. That was very close. Third is Behem, so it's off to Zoroark on an Energy Ball for a ton of damage. Since I am to do a critical hit, I switch into Fury, who eats the Energy Ball but gets a special defense drop. This means I have to switch into Spider-Ham on a Calm Mind, and from here 2 consecutive Night Slashes pick up the KO. Next is Kling Kling, so I add a Night Slash to break Air Balloon as he just goes for a Shift Gear. From here it's off to Fury to eat the Gear Grind. A Sacred Sword is just shy of the KO as Shift Gear comes out for the second time. This means I have to take one last Gear Grind before Sacred Sword KOs and defeats Colress. I then meet Ghetsis, and I gotta say I love the new look. He awakens Kyurem, who fuses Zekrom and creates a pretty powerful Dragon and Ice type. Fortunately, he's no match for Fury, who destroys him in 2 Sacred Swords. Because of this, Ghetsis wants to fight me. He leads off with Cofagrigus and I with Fury. I accidentally click Sacred Sword, which does no damage as I tank a hard Psychic. From here, I set up a Swords Dance, bringing me into the yellow. But then, unfortunately, Cofagrigus goes for Protect to do some stalling. An Iron Head does massive damage as I get a flinch, meaning another one picks up the KO on the next turn. Second is Seismitoad, who is a clean one-shot from Sacred Sword. Third is Drapion, so I switch it to Spider-Ham on an Earthquake. After taking a Night Slash, which is massive damage, an Earthquake gets the KO. Fourth is Electros, who I assume has Levitate, so it's off to Sandman on a Flamethrower. A Crunch then does exactly 50%, as Acrobatics brings you down into the yellow. Luckily, another Crunch gets the KO, and I get the Moxie boost. Fifth is Toxicroak, and thanks to Moxie, Earthquake is enough for the kill. Last is Hydreigon, so it's off to Green Goblin on a Dragon Rush for massive damage thanks to Life Orb. I then go for a Sacred Sword, leaving Hydreigon on what must be 1 HP, and then Dragon Rush destroys Green Goblin. Fortunately, Recoil takes the Dragon out, defeating Ghetsis and saving the world, but it did cost me one of my best Pokemon. RIP Green Goblin. At the gates of Victory Road, I meet N, and I must say the Victory Road looks pretty interesting in these games. It looks way more modern than in the original games. In Victory Road, I have one final rival fight with Sight. I knew this was coming, but I have no idea what his team is. He leads off with Unfezant and I with Fury. A Sacred Sword is just shy of the KO as I then get swaggered. Sight then heals back up to full HP, and I hurt myself in confusion. Great. An Iron Head is just shy of the KO, and I get the flinch, meaning another attack is enough to take the bird out. Second is Bouffalant, so I stay in because a single Sacred Sword is more than enough for the kill. Third is Simisage, who is easy pickings as one Sacred Sword gets the KO. Fourth and last is Samurott, and even with the attack boost, he does tank a Sacred Sword and goes for a Revenge for decent damage. Luckily, I outspeed to pick up the KO on the following turn, winning me a pretty easy battle. I'm now at the Pokemon League, and 5 trainers await me, one of them being Iris. I have a suspicion that the Elite Four is exactly the same, but only time will tell. Since I can't look up the trainers or do any searching, here's my final team. I definitely prioritized power and made what might be one of my most broken Elite Four teams ever. Although 4 of my members are weak to fighting, so hopefully there's no fighting type specialist. Let's do this. First is Chantel, so I guess I was right about teams being the same. She leads off with Cofagrigus and I with Sandman. A Crunch does massive damage before Shadow Ball hits for a smidge. From here, another Shadow Ball destroys the coffin, and I get a Moxie boost raising my attack. I KO Chandler with 2 crunches on the following turns, but Flame Body activates, meaning my attack is significantly compromised. I then switch into Thanos as Skolor goes for a Brick Break, which is a great move. That would have most likely KO'd Sandman even without a critical hit. A Surf is just shy of the KO as Shadow Punch leaves you with just a sliver of HP. She does heal up, but we outspeed and 2 more Surfs get the KO, leaving Jerf Bloom, whose Flying type means I have to switch into Spider-Ham on a Psychic, which we're immune to, and then I can get the KO with a Night Slash on the next turn, winning me the first Elite Four fight. Second in the Elite Four is Caitlyn and her Psychic types. She leads off with Musharna and I with Sandman. For some reason, Sue switches to Reuniclus, who's destroyed by a couple of crunches thanks to some healing shenanigans. And then thanks to the Moxie boost, Crunch sweeps their entire team without an issue, winning me a pretty easy battle. We always knew that any Psychic type trainer was never going to be an issue in the first place with Zoroark and Sandman on our teams. Third in the Elite Four is Grimsley, a Dark type trainer. He leads off with Liepard and I with Widow. This looks weird, and it is, but her Psychic type baits out a Dark move so I can switch into Fury, but she just goes for a Fake Out which crits. The idea was for her to hit a Dark type move to raise my attack with Justified, but it turns out all she had was Sucker Punch, which would have failed anyway. I then go for a Sword Stance as she just goes for an Aerial Ace for a bit of damage. Even with Intimidating Krokorok, it doesn't really matter because we still have attack boosts. That's another easy Elite Four member defeated. Last in the Elite Four is Marshall, and I'm terrified as 4 of our team members are weak to fighting. Once again, we'll address fighting in a future video. But for now, at least I have 2 Pokemon that are super effective into fighting. Leads off with Throw and I with Widow. A Psychic does massive damage as Rock Tomb hits to lower my speed. Marshall heals up and another Psychic gets the special defense drop. Throw then hits a payback for a bit of damage as Psychic gets the KO. Second is Mienshao, so I switch into Fury, but he goes for Bounce. He can then set up a Sword Stance as Bounce luckily doesn't paralyze. A Sacred Sword then rips through Mienshao, bringing in Conkeldurr. A Sacred Sword does way less than I expected and he just goes for a Bulk Up. The defense boost doesn't save him from another Sacred Sword and gets the KO, which brings in Sawk. Sawk lives a Sacred Sword thanks to Sturdy and hits a hard Brick Break. Marshall doesn't heal, allowing me to KO, winning me the battle. I had no clue Mienshao had Bounce, and I was going to try to bait a fighting move from Mienshao so I could switch to Thanos to lower his attack and then set up Sword Stances, but that works well. The last challenge in this run is the fight against Iris and her Dragon types. This fight is epic, and I lost the footage. You see, when I record, I didn't finish because my computer decided to reset itself, so I'm missing the entire fight. It's on my desktop and I tried to upload it to YouTube, but the file seems corrupted. Luckily I realized this after like 10 minutes after I finished the playthrough, so I immediately wrote down what happened. Iris leads off with Hydreigon, and I with Fury. A Sacred Sword does massive damage and we hang on for a Flamethrower, meaning another one gets the KO. However, this brings in Life Orb, Flamethrower, Druddigon. I hit a Sacred Sword for massive damage, but then Flamethrower destroys my Legendary. RIP, you made me feel like I was 11 again. This gives me a free switch to Spider-Man, who picks up the KO in one Ice Fang. This baits in Lapras with Surf, so I switch into Thanos as Lapras predictably goes for a Surf. I go for a Feather Dance to lower attack for some reason, even though this thing only has special moves, and I also go for a Roost to stall. Eventually Lapras gets a critical hit to destroy Thanos. RIP. If I had a nickel for every time the last trainer in the game got a critical hit to take my Swan out, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird it happened twice. This gives me a free switch to Widow, who hits a massive Thunderbolt, and we dodge a Sting, meaning another one KOs. This brings in Aggron, who destroys Widow with an Earthquake, marking the 3rd death of the fight. RIP. At least Sandman comes back in and KOs with 4 times super effective Earthquake, which brings in her Haxorus. An Ice Fang is exactly half before he sets up a Dragon Dance, raising his attack and speed. An Earthquake barely leaves Spider-Man alive, and another Ice Fang KOs, leaving Archeops. I tried to go for an Ice Fang, but Rock Tomb flinches me, which sucks. This means another Rock Tomb KO Spider-Ham, which is very unfortunate. You weren't on the team long, but you put in a ton of work towards the end. Zora comes in, hits a massive Night Slash, bringing this thing into the yell before Acrobatics gets the clean KO against him. I have 1 Pokemon left, being Sandman. He's the last man standing, and with a Crunch boosted by all 14 deaths of this playthrough, he KOs Archeops, winning me the battle and the entire run. That was a super fun run. Black 2 and White 2 are amazing Pokemon games and are worthy successors of their original games. That being said, I have a slight preference towards Black and White for reasons I can't really explain. I played Pokemon Black on the original DS, and I played Black 2 on a secret 3DS. I also used rare candies among other quality of life features, so maybe I didn't get the full immersion. Either way, these are great games and I look forward to replaying them. 9 out of 10. Make sure you subscribe and I'll see you in the next one. Peace. God, I'm really bad at outros.